Well, let's move on away and go to another story this time. The recently released annual South African Social Attitude Survey shows that young people in particular are losing faith in democracy. The survey, conducted by the Human Sciences Research Council HSRC in South Africa, revealed that only 32% of its respondents are satisfied with how democracy is working in the country.
This indeed is significantly different from 2004, a year which marked the country's first decade of democracy, where 59% of survey respondents were satisfied very much with democracy. Now, joining us now to discuss this further is a senior research specialist at the HSRC, Professor Joleen Steyn Kotze. Thank you very much, Prof, for joining us. Can you please take us through the key findings of this year's social attitude survey?
I think it's quite interesting that one of the key findings is that we have seen this general decline almost in democratic satisfaction. It is something that we have noticed year on year. But I think what makes this particular round quite significant was that it comes at a point in time where South Africans went to the poll in local government elections, and we had the lowest voter turnout in our democratic history at those polls. And then coupled with that, you find this very, very low level of satisfaction with democracy, where essentially approximately 2/3 of the population say, you know what, I'm not really satisfied with how my democracy is working.
Well, 32% is a significantly low number of respondents who are satisfied with how democracy is working in the country. What factors could possibly account for this? Oh, I'm afraid we seem to have network connectivity issues right there, but hopefully she gets back and we continue this conversation. Yeah. Let's look at that.
I think it's important that we have these conversations because at the end of the day, we have conversations about complaints about unemployment and inequality, and we're hoping that these factors need to be sorted out. I'd like to ask, what they can do to regain the country's trust in the young people. Gaining the young people's trust in the democratic system is such a sad thing because you can't effect any permanent change without people participating, without people trusting the system.
32% are indeed satisfied. The rest are not. So if you do your calculation, take a look at 32% minus 100%. I'm sure you're getting a total of 68% who have said we're not satisfied with this survey. And it's a survey that a lot of African leaders should actually invest in, especially in their countries. But this is South Africa, and the youths are saying, nope, we do not indeed enjoy what democracy is bringing forward. We've seen South Africa faced with a lot of challenges, be it from challenges that they face concerning the most recent one. We've also seen the case of the president. Okay, I think we have our guest back. Professor Joleen, if you're there, let's quickly...
Yes.
Okay, great to have you back. So let's go back to that question. We looked at the percentage of those who are satisfied. The respondents are just 32%. What do you think is responsible for this?
I think one of the key drivers around this democratic satisfaction is what I would argue is a continued inequality of opportunity. South Africa is still one of the most unequal countries in the world. And I do think that when you kind of look at the South African society and you look at the continued patterns of the spatiality of apartheid, the ability of young people in particular to go out and achieve their life's ambition and their life's dream is not necessarily open to all South Africans. So there is still quite a large sense of marginalization, as well as a continued racialized pattern of poverty and inequality.
Now, inequality is a big problem, like you've mentioned, but we're seeing that there are also rising unemployment rate and, of course, the unequal opportunities, together with ongoing government corruption. What would you say is the trajectory about how most South Africans would feel about democracy moving forward? Is it going to get better? Is it going to get worse? What should we expect?
Well, it's quite interesting because also our findings kind of go with what has been a global trend where we see an increased dissatisfaction with democracy globally, for example, based on the Varieties of Democracy survey. And again, a key factor around that global dissatisfaction with democracy are questions of inequality, hard living conditions, especially that young people face. So I think, if you kind of look at the trajectory and you take lessons from other countries learned so far, we are seeing the political space open up to more populist rhetoric, to more democratic disillusionment. I'm not going to vote. Democracy doesn't work for me. I'm not happy with my democracy because, look, it's been almost 30 years and my life situation has not necessarily improved. So I do think there's a number of factors that needs to be addressed. Number one is the question of good governance. If you have high levels of corruption within government, of course, what happens is there's less resources for redistribution in order to facilitate equality of opportunity. So the key step for me is first facilitate some semblance of good governance, get your governance structures functioning, your education, healthcare, water provision, sanitation, get the basics in place and get that functioning. And then from there on, start trying to build that democratic commitment.
Well, this lack of faith in democracy could mean a lot of things. I mean, for the country's future, including the number of voters for local and national government elections. Well, in 2024, South Africa will hold another national election. And what implications will this research have on that election and voters' turnout?
I think the 2024 election will be quite significant because when those elections roll around, we are look at the 30-year mark of democracy. And that for me is quite telling, where at the 10-year mark of democracy, just below 2/3 of the population, just under 60% were satisfied with democracy. And now as we are pushing towards that 30-year mark, you see this high level of democratic satisfaction. We learned, for example, in the previous local government elections, there is a loss of faith in political parties, in political leadership, where young people especially do not necessarily go out to the polls and vote. So your voter turnout is quite low. I think a possible scenario, and a very real scenario, is that for the first time in South Africa's democratic history, the African National Congress will have a very, very big challenge in order not just to maintain its dominance, but to actually get a majority and continue as the party in government at national level. And coupled with that, I do think we are going to see very, very low levels of voter turnout.
This is quite disheartening, the fact that you've mentioned that we're seeing low, or we're expected to see low voters turnout in 2024. What would you say can be done to encourage younger people to be more involved in the system, and how can we increase their trust in the democratic system?
Well, that's always the key question, what is the magic recipe, so to speak, in order to facilitate, rebuilding that democratic trust. And again, as I've mentioned, I think a key thing is facilitating good governance, facilitating effective service delivery. And of course, your civic education programs become quite important. That said, however, we also need to look at how politicians do politics, so to speak. What we are seeing increasingly is people are not necessarily falling to very big political rhetoric, or how can I say, the narratives around the grand plans, but rather looking at what are the specific little plans that you can implement today to make my life better for tomorrow, and then subsequently build on that. So for me, I think it really goes back to how one does politics, the promises that are made, and how you execute and facilitate implementation in order to achieve those promises.
All right, thank you very much. This has been a very, very insightful conversation, and I am hoping that the leaders, the politicians, will take into account these concerns that young people have. Young people 18 to 34 make up 1/3 of South Africa's population, and it would be a shame that they're not participating in the polls. But I would like to say thank you very much, Professor, for joining us. We've had Professor Senior Specialist at the HSRC, Professor Joleen Steyn Kotze, joining us. So thank you very much for speaking with us this morning.
Thank you.